that on the battlefield, that in danger, fighting for a cause. Not like we heard a few moments before dinner, not like Lighthorse Harry Lee, who's fighting for the reputation of Lighthorse Harry Lee. This man, Francis Marion, fights for the cause. There's considerable nobility in that. That's the best of the bourgeoisie, best of the Marion family. Well, that's one thing that happened to Francis Marion early on. But we left him as a farmer, George, and he gets his reputation as a soldier. How does he do that? What's the next question?
Why was Marion not among those who surrendered Charleston in 1780?
This is almost a giveaway question here. Maybe he got too cold. Who's Alexander McQueen? Anybody know Alexander McQueen? Colonel McQueen? Well, he owns a house in downtown Charleston at the corner of Orange and Trad. Does that help anybody? Well, he's a soldier. He's rough and tough and mean, and he loves his food and he loves his whiskey, and so he has a party. He's the host in his own home in downtown Charleston, and invited the leaders of the militia group. Francis Marion now, we're talking about 1780, we're talking about after the Battle of Fort Moultrie. Francis Marion has got a name and a reputation as a military man, so he is invited, as all officers, to the party at Alexander McQueen's. Now, those of you who are familiar and can probably describe it better than I with the architecture of the East Bay line down there in Charleston, all the houses are big, all the houses are ornate. Practically every one of the houses starts on the second floor. The ground floor is left for you to keep your horses if necessary, but certainly you keep your wagons and your chariots and whatever underneath. Use them like a garage. So you build in your garage, meaning they start at the ground and go up to the first floor. And so the party starts not on the ground floor, but on the second. And the way they go in those days, once the guests come in and the time limit passes, the door is locked. And they drink one toast after another toast, and they get pretty well liquored up. Except Francis Marion, he's a bourgeois, and he likes his glass of wine. But you know, 1, 2, maybe 3, that's enough. But these people were having 5 and 10 and 15. And Francis Marion is not having a good time. And in order to escape the bad time, what does he do? Who knows? He jumps out the window. He jumps out the window. And he lands crooked on one leg. His right ankle is twisted beneath him and it is broken. He can't walk. He can drag himself around a little bit, but he can't walk. Somehow or another, he's got to have some quiet time so that the break will heal. The place to have the quiet time is at Pond Bluff. It's not far away. And so they carried him back there. They had a makeshift cot even, and they dragged him along, where 2 men would drag from the top of the cot, each with an arm in hand, and the other arms back here on the ground, Francis Marion in the middle. Not a very comfortable ambulance, by the way. Nevertheless, they got him back to Pond Bluff, and he's going to get better. But while he's there in Pond Bluff, still incapacitated when it comes to walk, General Lincoln, who is now the Continental commander of the troops that are in Charleston, surrenders to the British. The city of Charleston, after a long argument among the leaders of the city as well as the military, and I'm surprised they had that much of an argument. The military usually just decides this sort of thing, but the decision was made to surrender. It was a terrific surrender. It is a serious, serious blow. George Washington has got some troops up in the north, but Benjamin Lincoln is the only one that's got any troops in the south. So when Charleston falls, the south is pretty much in the hands of the British. And they know Francis Marion's name. You know, he'd been there at Fort Moultrie. People have been talking about it. Spies had called his name. The British want to capture Francis Marion. And so they sent out parties looking for him. One of the parties came to Pond Bluff. Knowing that that party was coming, those who liked the idea of liberty, those who were willing to wear the hat, you know, but most wore the tricorn. Tricorn. 1, 2, 3, tricorn hat. And so that was one thing. Marion, though, thank you. Marion had seen to it that there was a special protection, and this is the hat. It was really a helmet, leather, and he wore this. And so he has his helmet on, and then he has the crescent. And written on the crescent is something. It depends upon which book you read. Maybe the word liberty is written there. Maybe the words liberty or die are written there. Nevertheless, this is a symbol. This is the way in future battles, Francis Marion knows who is on his side and who's on the other side. It's sort of like a uniform. It is a dress uniform, but not on the battlefield. And all men who fought with Francis Marion don't have uniforms. If you want to know about these things, you have to search the books. I went to the library down in Florida where I now live, and I got from there 7 books on Francis Marion. Some of them are children's books. Some of them are the kind of books that some of you out there seem to need because you don't answer the questions that I've been given. But there was just an attempt on the part of the British to always wear uniforms. There was a business like the Americans who wanted to be known as soldiers, thought that was the best thing in the world. They wore their uniform. The rest of Francis Marion's men just came dressed, you know. They wore what they wore, and they wore their own clothing. And they didn't have such things as dress parades. That'll come up later in our conversation, I think. At any rate, he's in trouble. Francis Marion is. They're after him. His ankle is still giving him trouble. He still can't walk very well. And so he leaves Pond Bluff and goes to his brother Isaac's house. Isaac now lives at Little River, which is right close to North Carolina. So it's a considerable distance away. So he sort of flees those British who are looking for him. But there are very few people who go with him. Most of the people who had been with him before are now prisoners. Even some of the outstanding South Carolinians of the time, they are captured there in Charleston and put in prison or on prison ships. The only reason Francis Marion does not end his military career in Charleston is because here he is with his broken ankle. He's not in the town when the town has to surrender. It was a close call for him personally, a better call for the cause of the American Revolution. So here he sits, waiting for his ankle to get better, anxious to get back into the fight in case there is some more fight left. But now, George, what about the next question?
What was the significance about Witherspoon's Landing?
Witherspoon's Landing. How many people in the room know if I ask you to carry me to Witherspoon's Landing tomorrow morning, how many of you could drive me there? Oh, I'm glad to see the hands. Glad to see the hands. It's a landing, it's across the river, you know, and it's Witherspoon's Landing. Francis Marion, anxious to be involved, decides when his ankle gets a little better to take his men. There are only about 10 of them. None of them have a uniform, you know, and they haven't shaved in 10 days, and they look awful. But here he makes his way across to Camden. This is in 1780. Charleston has just fallen. The battle at Camden had just been fought. General Gates is gone from Camden, and Francis Marion shows up and says, "Here I am ready to serve. We can't give up to the British." Most of the colony was ready to give up. Earlier today, we heard about the British strategy in the South. Well, the British, pardon my remembering, Southern strategy was, you know, to come and to take over the southern states. They weren't doing too well in the north, and so they wanted to come to the south because they thought they would find friends in the south. And Francis Marion was one of the few who was willing to fight about it. General Gates saw Francis Marion. Would you recognize him? Is he 6 feet tall? No, he's not 6 feet tall. Is he a handsome Cary Grant? And the answer is no, he's not. In fact, he's rather notorious for not looking like Cary Grant. People commented on the fact that it just didn't seem to fit. His nose didn't fit right. His jaw was not what it ought to be. He's a short fella, and he limps. He just doesn't look like a soldier. And he shows up and he says to General Gates, "Here I am at your service, sir. I and my 8 followers, or my 10 followers." And man says to himself, or Gates says to himself, "What am I going to do with this fellow? You know, I've got enough problems as it is, and I got to do something." And so he says, "Why don't you go down? Because I want to respond to a man named John James who has come up from what you and I today call Johnsonville, or the area down near the ferry. And Well, why don't you go down and on the way you can destroy all the boats that are on the rivers? That'd be something for you to do. And you destroy the boats because if indeed we win the next battle, the British will want to use the boats to escape, and we'll keep you from escaping. And so Francis Marion came down. He got to Williamsburg Landing, and there John James met him. Now, John James, he's not a military man either. He's a very successful farmer, but he's highly regarded. He's taken some actions already to show what a faithful man he is, and he's highly respected. And so he introduces Francis Marion to the militia of that area. Now, Francis Marion doesn't live in the Williamsburg district. That's where the landing is. And he is not really authorized through the military units. He didn't have any right at all to be in charge of this group of fighters in Williamsburg that he finds at Williamsburg Landing. But John James said, let's follow him. And so we're going to follow him. He took charge immediately. And the first thing that he did, this came up earlier this afternoon too. First thing that he did, discipline. Discipline. He had practiced this before with some other people following the battle at Fort Moultrie when he was in Dorchester. And he said to his soldiers, you must look like soldiers. You must learn how to drill. You must learn how to obey orders. You must learn who your commanders are and who your colleagues are. And we're serious about this. When men were not serious, he punished them, sometimes in serious ways. He had some lashed. He had one executed for disobedience. Francis Marion's tough as far as that's concerned, but he's also soft. Among other things, he said to his men, you've got to cut your hair. Your hair cannot be any longer than the back of your neck. Some people had let the hair grow and grow long, and guess what got in the hair? You know, fleas and other things get in the hair. They spread things around. They're unsafe. They didn't really know about antiseptic yet, but they knew that they had to obey. And incidentally, if they didn't obey, in addition to the tough punishments, he sometimes just made fun of people. For instance, he made people go around carrying their guns backwards so that they were unusable. These are people who act like they're soldiers and they're not. He said to some people, when they misbehaved and didn't do right, he made them wear petticoats for a week at a time, and here's a soldier who's having to wear a woman's petticoat because he's not much of a soldier. But the discipline was there, sometimes soft, sometimes tough, and sometimes just by word of mouth. In these books that I got, there aren't any jokes. You know? That's why Winston Churchill is so much more desirable than Francis Marion. Winston Churchill's got a joke almost every line in his book. And you can enjoy it. There are very few. The one that I'm referring to right now is the braggart lieutenant who'd been away, said he had to go to his father's funeral. It was the third funeral his father had had. and so he said he was going to his father's funeral, and it would take him, I'm not sure, 3 days, let's say, and he stayed 6. And he caroused a good bit. When he came back, he was in the presence of Francis Marion. He was explaining how he didn't get back, that things were so bad at home. And Marion, after he let him talk for a while, looked him in the eye and said, it's all right, Lieutenant. I didn't know that you were gone. And it was an absolute insult. You know, here's this lieutenant who was acting as though he was running the show. And Francis Marion said, no, You know, I didn't even know you were gone. So Marion used his lip as well as his rank for discipline purposes. He did that the whole time. That's one of the reasons why he was a better man than those he fought with and those he fought against, because his men were well disciplined. The men griped about discipline, but they loved it. They realized that this leader we've got is somebody who can discipline us and make us into a fighting force. And so, when at Witherspoon's Landing, John James said, "Here's our new commander. He doesn't look like much, but he's our new commander." They were willing to give him a chance, and then Francis Marion made it on his own. But he made it, George. How high did he go?
And we're doing good, Professor, but with these dull students here, we're getting close to their end of their period. They're going to have to change to another class. I would suggest that we do this one more question, and after you help them out with that answer, that we perhaps send them on their way, and you give them a little instruction to steady up so that the next time we meet together as a class, they're a little bit more alert.
I heard you, George. Say it. You're taking up time, George. But
when the Revolutionary War ended, what rank did Francis Marion hold?
well, there were two kinds of ranks. He's a brigadier general according to South Carolina. He's a lieutenant colonel according to the United States Continental Troops. Let me skip through to some answers rather than questions from then on. One of the questions says, what did he do on the 14th of December in 1782? That's the day Charleston was freed from British control. With a little negotiation ahead of time, General Greene and others have said to the British, you must leave Charleston. And the British said, we will promise to leave Charleston and not destroy it if you won't come in and make a battle out of it. And so the Americans decided on the Great Parade. General Greene is the head of the Continental Forces. And so they want to make sure that the British surrender not to the Americans, but to the American Army. And so Greene says the Army is going to take charge. And we're going to have the serried ranks. He forgot about Francis Marion. And then later, when he did remember about Francis Marion, Marion regarded the omission as an insult. It was pretty obvious that the Southern militia